here to introduce Lee. Lee's got 35 years experience in watershed resources. Probably everybody here knows him, but if you don't, one of the things that really jumps out to me about him it's sort of easy to get the technical expertise when you've been doing uh, this as long as Lee has, or I wouldn't say easy. It's a kind of a natural outcome. What uh what he pulls off really well is humility with it, to be able to uh make you want to listen to him, somebody that really knows what he's talking about, and it doesn't come across as arrogant, or I've never really figured out how to strike that balance. I think Lee really does it. He's registered really all over the place, does geomorphic assessments, natural channel design, modeling, ecological enhancement projects, and he's going to talk first, and then he's going to be talking about taking process nature-based corridor design to the politicians. That ought to be a good one. Uh, I've heard that called sometimes maybe herding cats. Maybe might be a different way to say that. And then we're going to have a inspirational discussion a little bit later about where River Share is going a little bit later. So, Lee, go ahead when you're ready, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Wade. And again, sorry for being right on the edge of being late there, everybody, but thanks for being here. I think I'll just do can everybody see my screen?
I can't.
Yep. Okay, all right. So this presentation is a draft, kind of a work in progress, and it's almost like a working session for this group, because I know most of the folks on this call, and I think probably you all have some really good ideas to help us move this kind of idea forward, and it is certainly something that I'm hoping we can come up with a presentation, or a set of presentations that we can use through River Shared to move our message to elected officials. And so the presentation comes in a large part, this taking process nature-based corridor design comes up. That phrase comes a lot out of what David Vittlesbach was talking about in his training session and workshop at the National Stream Conference. And so we'll look at that a little bit, and I think that's going to be a cornerstone of how we want to talk to politicians. And I'm going to use the phrase elected officials, because I just think people would rather be called an elected official than a politician. Some of them may not mind too much, but we'll try not to piss anybody off as soon as we start talking to them by calling them something else. So, so what are we going to try to do here today? We're going to talk about this concept of process nature-based corridor design. And that phrase is certainly a work in progress that Dave and I came up with last week. And I had been working on this all last week since we did some training together in Arkansas. And so whether that's the end phrase, but we would like to come up with something that captures this new approach to how we look at projects and do their design. And then next, we want to look at the historic and emerging roles of process nature-based corridor design in the U.S. and the need or importance of education of elected officials on PNBCD and critical aspects and concepts of PNBCD training to get broad buy-in from elected officials. So that's the nature of this talk today. Again, it's the first run. It's not the actual presentation. It's kind of where we're coming from with this, so we can get feedback from you guys and in short order come up with one or more presentations on for River Shared that would be on River Shared logo that we can present as individuals and modify as we feel necessary to our own clients and partners as we're trying to move this forward into the what is a new realm, really. So if you see a lot of typos, which I see some right here, please remember that this is a draft, and I just got it all put together, and it will be polish it up and put it on River Shared slide headers whenever for the final one. So what is process nature-based corridor design? Well, again, at this National Stream conference, Ellen Wall talked a lot about, we are natural channel design or what have you. Traditionally, we might, in stream restoration design, we might have been focused on the channel, and that we really need to incorporate the entire corridor of the floodplain, the active floodplain, abandoned floodplains, and the other features that may be on those connected floodplains, like riverine wetlands and forested riparian corridors, into the design. Right, we have to look at this holistically as that whole system. So that's the corridor part of it. The process nature-based is, look, we've got to come to some way forward to trying to pit process versus natural channel or nature-based analog reference type design. And so, because we really need all of those to make this to get to good designs. And I think we're all people that are actually building these things every day and designing them and building them understand that. And so this is another, these ecosystem design tools is a concept that Dave came up with that I like a lot. And it really looks at the different types of design. And when people ask us, well, what's the difference? And we're probably, analytical design is looking at a specific set of equations that talk about the laws or define the laws of the natural world. And reference-based design is when we make scientific observations of the natural world. And then predictive-based designs are scientific predictions of interactions in the natural world, like modeling, what have you. And then if we look at, and this is not an exhaustive list, and I think we want to polish this list up and try to be consistent in format, but what are the corridor design tools that we need to be looking at? Roskin's natural channel design, and I think it was interesting, Dave and I were talking, it was a point we hardly heard Dave Roskin's name mentioned at the National Stream Conference. And I think that's, I think we definitely are moving to include much broader design processes for different situations. But the natural channel design is a fundamentally an awesome tool that we're using every day to do our design in conjunction with lots of other design tools that we might have at our disposal. And so this list is just trying to show that beaver dam analogs and ultra low tech process based restoration of riverscapes, which is that technique that they developed at the University in Utah, the NOAA's Pacific Northwest process-based design, which I'm just showing as an example where the focus is on the processes and how do we get those to the goals that we're trying to achieve. But all and stage zero design, of course, is on here. And then, we use a lot in our projects, a lot of threshold or immobile riffle design. And one thing finally, oh my gosh, you guys hold on just a second. I'm going to have to let my dog out or she's going to start barking. Yeah. That. So we've got to include and we've got to start talking about all of these as being design tools, and we can't do it with any one really if we want to be able to address every situation that we encounter out there as far as the boundary conditions and the project we're looking at. What is a historic? So that's something, anyway, process nature-based corridor design is something we need to as a community, I think, come up with a way to embrace this and help us move forward away from individual camps, right? And so any help we can get from you guys on that would be great. So what is the historic role in the United States of process nature-based corridor design? And a month ago, I would have called this historic role of stream restoration in the U.S. But again, we're embracing this concept, even though we've been doing it, of acknowledging that the entire corridor has to be included in the design process. Well, historically, right, our markets have been driven by Clean Water Act, Section 404 mitigation, right? Mitigation banks, stream and wetland. Section 319 non-point source program grant for stream and wetland restoration, right, is part of the program to address non-point sources. And then the Endangered Species Act, which deals with aquatic habitat and fish passage restoration, right? So these and again, building banks that establish credits for such habitat are in situations like the Pacific Northwest and other places where they've actually been just dealing with that head on for a long time. What is the emerging role? Well, this is kind of what I gave a talk about recently, several different kind of talks about this. Is there's a whole new market coming that's going to really be equal or greater in dollars spent on these new markets that are coming online in the U.S. and they're driven by federal funding. And these federal fundings that I'll talk about all require consideration and preferential treatment or preference of nature-based solutions in developing projects. And PNBCD, obviously being stream and wetland and riparian restoration, is a primary nature-based solution. And I've given talks about that, but what are the federal government's ideas of nature-based solutions? Well, we all understand that stream corridors and riparian corridors with their wetlands are primary to nature-based solutions. So FEMA and HUD disaster recovery funding emphasizes NBS for building community watershed resilience and mitigating impacts of natural hazards. So all 5 of FEMA's grant programs talk about you should look at and provide preferential treatment for nature-based solutions and going after these grants. So you're going to get a higher score on your grant application to the next guy if you have nature-based solutions in there. The same thing is true for HUD community development block grants. And in fact, a lot of those programs now have percentage requirements that have to have both NBS projects as part of that percentage and also disadvantaged communities, right? And we're seeing that in the $1.2 billion Louisiana Watershed Initiative, where 40% of those dollars have to be spent using nature-based solutions and disadvantaged communities. And these are big dollars, as we're all aware of, right? Because natural disasters are not only becoming less, they're becoming more, and they have already been pretty significant. Also, we've got the two bipartisan acts that were passed in the first 2 years of Biden administration: Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IJA, and the Inflation Reduction Act. Between the two, they've got over $50 billion that focus on climate and resiliency and MBS infrastructure. And then the Biden administration last year laid out a $25 billion NBS roadmap at COP27. And then finally, if you look at, we're working on some NRCS projects right now, and the 2017 Principles, Requirements, and Guidelines, PR&G, for federal water resources projects, places an emphasis on NBS through their guiding principles. And this is just now coming into play in the Biden administration, and we're seeing it in RCS, and it's to replace this old system called P&G, Principles and Guidelines. And the words don't mean a lot, but the meat of their requirements are that you have to look at these 5 guiding principles in your alternatives analysis, and there is no preference for cost above any of these other interests or missions. So healthy and resilient ecosystems, floodplains, and watershed approach, obviously, and I think even some of the other ones like environmental justice and sustainable economic development can be associated with NBS, right? And so our corridor design process, nature-based corridor design, fits right in there. And then finally, there are progressive local and regional governments that are utilizing PNBCD in drainage and flood control systems as the preferred approach of their own accord. I know firsthand, you guys, if you know me, you've probably helped me work on some Harris County Flood Control District projects or heard about them in the past in Houston. And then I know from Dave's experience in my high flood district in Denver, they're both of these, and hopefully, I think there are probably quite a few other ones that you guys have dealt with, where local flood and drainage communities are dealing with this head on. And then I've got 2 more slides here, so I think we're 3 more slides, but we'll get through it really quick. So what's the need and importance of the education of elected officials? So that was in the title of this, and I haven't talked about it yet. Well, it's all about funding and who are the clients. So look at the historic roles, right? 404 mitigation, 319 grants, ESA, so species banks. Who are the local funders and decision makers on that, right? All those current and past ones, it was private sector, natural resource nonprofits, or state and federal agencies, right? And the local elected officials really are not specifically involved in making decision about what kind of projects get the money. Well, look at the emerging role, right, of PMBCD. So these new emerging markets, FEMA and HUD, those projects have to be supported by the local elected officials, whether they're city, county, or regional entities. Major federal funding for NBS infrastructure and climate resiliency, same thing. We're seeing that again through these NRCS projects are funded through IJA, and the local mayors are the sponsors, right? And so and county officials are also sponsors. Federally funded water resource projects. So these are like core projects. Well, those are often the local decision maker has to be the local community and elected officials. And then these local and regional governments, obviously. So these are the elected officials this may all be new to them. That's the point of this, is that they may not have had the heard the debates or even know what nature-based solutions are, or know what stream restoration is or wetland restoration. For the first time, they may be hearing that, and they need to have enough education to be able to evaluate it versus what they've seen in the past. And what are the critical aspects and concepts that we need to have in this training to elected officials? First, they need to be short, half hour to an hour. And that'll be best, I think, for initial introduction. I think over time we'll have opportunities to have workshops and maybe have longer training. But right now we need to come up with a half hour to an hour presentation, or maybe one of each, because those can be quite different, as you know, what you can say in a half hour to an hour. Key training concepts is the emerging role of NBS and local regional flood control and drainage infrastructure, because that's what's driving these projects: flood control and drainage infrastructure. We need to introduce this concept of PNBCD as a primary component of NBS and highlight the benefits in drainage, flood control, flood risk mitigation, and community resiliency. And I think maybe some of us don't even realize that they are, of course, they're more sustainable and resilient. That's a big thing now, resiliency. But here's what most people may not realize: of the many projects we've done in Harris County flood control, stream restoration projects, really priority 2 type projects, have been right at or lower than traditional trapezoidal channels with armoring, which is required for these channels but the way they built them. So they're actually seeing lower cost projects that have way more benefits than we can talk about just cost, right? But that's what they have. And then they maximize their opportunities for federal funding. Again, they'll get higher scores from federal grants. And then finally, we need to come up with, like I said, collectively, I don't even know if this phrase is right, PNBCD. That's such a mouthful, but we got to come up with something we're going to call it. We're not going to say this is the new way to do it. We're saying this is an umbrella of tools. And we need to be able to say to people, some places, beaver dam analogs may work. Some places, stage 0 might work. Some places, other places, yeah, we need a single thread channel, and it needs to be priority 2, and we may have to use threshold design for armored riffles to make sure all this stuff holds together. So we've got to be able to explain that to them, the differences, and then we get to, well, how do we know where to use what? We've got to start maybe looking at this concept of letting goals and objectives drive assessment and design approaches and tools. And what we found, a great way to do that, an incredible way, is to use a multi-criteria decision analysis, MCDA tool, to identify the most appropriate project alternatives from that whole umbrella. Look at them all, and then come up with goals and objectives set by the stakeholder community that help them convince themselves, whether the stakeholder community is just the mayor and his drainage department head, or it's public meetings and getting input from the entire community. Whatever your stakeholder group is, let them drive the selection of the most appropriate alternatives based on what they define as the most important goals and objectives. And that's it. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late, but if you guys have any questions, I really reach out. We can talk about it right now, I guess, at whatever time we have. I'm not quite sure, Wade, but also you could reach out to me or Dave or Wade, and who's also helping us on this stuff a little bit. And again, the goal is to get a river shared presentation that we can all take and use and build on individually, that we can use to make the case that I just talked about. So that's it. Anybody? What's the deal on time for questions there, Wade?
We're on time for a couple of questions if somebody has any.
I got a question, Lee. This is Josh Gilman. Good to hear from you. Always,
Hey,
always,
Josh.
yeah, it's always inspiring. You always got a good angle on things, and I appreciate it. I agree. I think it's good to develop a consistent and continuous message to administrators, and keeping the connection from administration to project delivery is really important. And I think also not to overshadow your point in your message, but I think across the spectrum of getting project delivery from administrative to implementation includes the funding source itself. We need clarity. I'm seeing funding sources get applied by federal agencies, and they're trying to come in and do this, this benefit analysis, kind of like what you're saying. They're using a similar approach, but they've got a shortened checklist, and it's been watered down so it's anybody can play. We need to bring the practitioners into the forum more frequently, just to keep checks on things, and it starts with the funding source itself. So a lot of our municipalities, while you might get a savvy, educated mayor who relies on a panel of people with good ideas, oftentimes you get the administrator who's like, we're going to check these boxes and we're going to answer the letter, and that's all we're doing. And so oftentimes that results in a project that's less than comprehensive.
Yeah,
So
no,
that's my
great
point, is funding first.
That's a great point. And we've got this recorded, so I'll go back and kind of dig into what you were saying there and try to get that captured in a statement. But totally, I know what you're saying. And you're absolutely right. Yeah, we need to add that. It says, yeah, that's what I'm looking for, is that kind of input.
Yeah,
We need
funding alignment. Yeah, funding alignment and how it plays out. And we've seen programs. We talk about mitigation banking and some of the things that have worked and not worked out. And I don't know if you've been tracking some of the latest conversations about our carbon sequestration projects and goals. There was a good conversation similar to what you're talking about, but more on a carbon scale of projects. So I don't know if there's I think education is definitely, I love it. I love that. And all the way through the whole spectrum of linkages, from ideas to spending to implementation. I agree. That's good points.
No, that's good. I think carbon sequestration is one of those benefits I need to put on that list. These presentations are going to be in a half hour to an hour. We're not going to be able to get in depth, but I think on a bullet list, carbon sequestration needs to be on there just like mine were. And then hopefully you're going to get the audience to come back and want to dig deeper. But yeah, we'll get definitely.
It's often realized value that pairs neatly with the work we're doing. And honestly, I think a lot of the work we've done and the progress we made, whether it's through these publicly funded municipal, driven initiatives or through mitigation banking, I think those frameworks definitely establish a good foothold, that we can advance what we're doing and get a head start on some of that, or at least learn from the lessons, learned from what we have.
What we know, leverage this knowledge and the hard work we've all put in getting to where we are in our current markets. Yeah.
John,
good
you got
point.
a question?
Yeah, good
John
morning.
or David?
Was that a call for John?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lee, thanks so much. This is a really important conversation for sure nationally. And just two examples I wanted to bring up that hopefully will shed light on some concerns I'm seeing are, for instance, when beaver dam analogs or some similar structure are designed in a system where they're not considering that they may not be appropriate and based on the existing environmental conditions or ecological conditions, and so can cause some problems like flanking and bank erosion. Even channel incision when done in a way that doesn't consider that, hey, the banks aren't ready for this because there's no willows, for instance. Another one, we're seeing more of, this general term, messy rivers, right? And I've seen a project recently where they say, well, let's just let all the banks erode, or that, hey, it's okay to have erosion because it's a natural process, without considering that, well, every regraded floodplain and stream is a raw treatment in an otherwise, if we looked at the the reference condition, it does have a vegetation in it. Yes, it can erode on its own natural trajectory, but in a raw and graded river, calling it a messy stream to justify that everything should just be able to erode is erroneous. So I just want to bring those things up as we're thinking about, well, how do we integrate the greater interactions between natural vegetation and fresh stream restoration projects when it comes to things like natural channel design, BDAs, and messy rivers, for instance.
Absolutely. And I think, and that's the hard part, is because we're still trying to get there as an industry, right? To get us on a consensus about this umbrella. And obviously in an urban setting, we're not going to be able to do any of those things, right? We're going to have single thread channels and probably some extra armoring because we have to fight shear stresses because we can't get a floodplain wide enough or so. But in certain points of the headwaters, there are opportunities to do all those things. And so that's another thing that somebody way smarter than me at the design processes, like Dave and Will Harmon and many of you on this call, y'all need to come up with this umbrella and figure out where all these things fit, so we don't throw any of them away, and we find the conditions where they work best. At least in a sense, it may be a little vague. You don't want to just concrete box in everything, but we need something a tool that lets us look at a site and have all the tools that have shown to be successful in any condition, understand where they work and how we can evaluate our project against this criteria list, right? That Dave's always talking about. One way we can do that is the MCDA, where we get to, well, what are your goals and objectives, right? And if they and you're going to see in urban settings and suburban settings the different goals and objectives than you are in the headwater communities, and or where they have room to let the river do that work. Which there are places like that where that's a most appropriate approach. So and then once we get through all that, we got to get that refined down. How do we get that into half of a 30-minute talk to where it's actually has any value?
I think the caller that's a great point. I wasn't able to track who made that comment about the application. We don't have a consistent message internally. How are we going to deliver a consistent message externally? We all need to get on the same page, and quit arguing about what we title things and what we call things. But to the point that was made is, you have practitioners that are at the ends of the spectrum saying, oh, well, this is okay, and I believe that's okay, and it might be based on good science or anecdotal data or nothing at all. And so for that matter, I mean, the root cause I see there is, if we're not delivering a consistent message as practitioners, how are we going to teach anyone any consistent messaging?
We do one more question, Dave. You want to? You've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, and basically my thought, I just want to remind everybody, this conversation will be continued next week. So how we're framing this year is every week we're going to have a Monday morning call, but we're only going to have a technical invited speaker every other week. And the week after, that will be a time for discussion to go back and forth, bring forth questions to the group. The invited speaker may be on the next week or they may not be on, but it's just meant for discussion. So if you think about this week and think about ideas that as you have the week go on, you're like, hey, I listened to that, or I watched it online, I have questions, then you can get the questions sent off to the moderator, to the presenter, and then we can hopefully be able to talk about it next week. So I just wanted to let everybody know that's kind of the way that we're moving forward with it this year. So then each week we'll have an invited speaker, but we will rotate between the invited speaker being a technical speaker and an inspirational speaker. And then the week that we don't have an invited speaker, we'll be talking about and having a discussion on the concepts of the invited speaker from the week before. So
maybe that would be serve as a good challenge and a transition to the next part of the conversation. Next week, that's a mouthful, like Lee said, and maybe sort of crowdsource a definition to this. And a couple of things that people can be thinking about is what could you call this, and something that's an easy container that you can communicate a lot of information in just a word or two, or just a thought that you can sell elected official on. And another thing is how one of the biggest obstacles I see is how when you start talking about elected officials about these sort of projects, my question or their question to me is many times, well, how does that get me elected more? So that's an obstacle too. So maybe we can be thinking about that. And Dave, you brought up a good point. Maybe a little bit of change in trajectory of how things are going to go in the future, or what's the vision, and maybe if you can start off that discussion and kind of give us a heads up on what we're looking for.
great. All right.